Wednesday morning, the Prime Minister set out his position on the debate around transgender people, didn't he, yesterday in his speech? This is what he said.
And we shouldn't get bullied into believing that people can be any sex they want to be. They can't. A man is a man and a woman is a woman. That's just common sense.
Well, let's see what the President of the National Union of Students in Scotland thinks about that. Trans rights campaigner Ellie Gommersall been on the programme previously. Hi, Ellie. Good to see you again. What did you make of what the Prime Minister had to say yesterday?
It's not only depressing, it's actually pretty terrifying. I mean, we've seen over sort of recent years, it feels like trans rights have been rolled back and rolled back and rolled back. Because actually, trans people, we've always existed. We've had protections in law. We've been able to actually legally change our sex. In law for almost 20 years now. We've had protections in the Equality Act for 13 years now. But all of a sudden, in the past sort of 2 or 3 years, it feels like our rights have just been up for debate again. And it's really, really difficult because it's really clear to see that, the situation around trans people haven't changed. There's not been any sort of change in circumstances, but all of a sudden, politicians like now Rishi Sunak, the most powerful man in the country, are using trans people, I think, to distract from the real issues. The fact that the Conservatives have been in power for 13 years, there's a general election coming up, and they want to create an issue to distract people. But
let's stick with the subject, if we may, please, Ellie. And I was putting it to the Transport Secretary earlier, and I said, and he said, there's a world of difference between sex and gender. What's the difference to you?
Well, I think that when it comes to sort of things like sex and gender, I think it is a personal thing. When it comes to sort of the vast range of sort of human experiences people have, we know that actually from even a biological perspective, that sex can be incredibly diverse. Even when we're not talking about just trans people, there's about 10% of people in the country, most of whom will never even know, who don't necessarily have the sexual characteristics that you would expect to see from a man or a woman. The thing is these sort of things don't actually matter in the grand scheme of things. It doesn't actually matter what your chromosomes are. No one ever goes to check your chromosomes. But all of a sudden, we're having this big conversation, we're having this big debate. But the reality for trans people like me is that hate crime against trans people has more than doubled in recent years. When you look at the British Social Attitude Survey, which was published recently, you can see that support for trans people and support for trans rights, actually, when you go back a few years ago, just as far back as 2019, support among the general public was actually pretty high. It was well into the majority who supported, trans rights and the ability for us to change our legal sex and gender and things like that. And now, actually, the number of people who openly say that they're prejudiced against trans people has increased really quite significantly, almost a majority of the population. And that's terrifying as someone who has to go out and live my life as a trans person. This isn't a topic for debate at a conference for me. It's my everyday, day-to-day life. And when I see, the amount of abuse that myself and other people, my friends, are getting, whether that's online or, unfortunately, is increasing in person now, this sort of rhetoric from the most powerful man in the country only furthers that hatred, only increases my risk of being attacked. And that's really, really scary. Earlier this year, a young trans woman, a teenager, was murdered. And, obviously we don't want to get into sort of full details as to why that happened, but clearly transphobia was an element there, and we're seeing that more and more and more across the UK.
Ellie,
and it's really
let me put
scary.
this to you, if I may. And the Prime Minister, because we were limited on time, forgive me. The Prime Minister says, no, you're either a man or a woman. That's it. What would you say in response to him?
what I would say is that that's just not the reality. It's not the biological reality either. I'd say to the Prime Minister, speak to some scientists, speak to some people who are actually experts in this field. But the thing is that I think that Rishi Sunak actually knows this, because earlier this year, we spoke actually about, the gender recognition bill in Scotland, and the Conservatives then were saying that actually their issues with the bill were just purely because of sort of essentially logistical facts in terms of sort of Scotland and England. Now it's really clear that the Conservatives have changed their attitude, and now they're purely ideologically opposed to furthering trans rights. I think that this is a ploy by the Conservatives. I don't think that Rishi Sunak even actually believes it himself. I think he's just using it as an election device.
Ellie, we are out of time, but it's good to talk to you. Can I just say that you're looking fabulous? Thanks for taking the time to join us. Quick look at the weather.